72 hours before my phone lit up with a $20 billion offer, my mother was picking lint off her cashmere sweater, telling me my degree was a cute little hobby. This isn't a fairy tale about hard work paying off. It's about the cold, quiet satisfaction of proving them wrong. Sweat pooled at the base of my spine, trapped there by the cheap, synthetic fabric of a graduation gown that felt more like a garbage bag than a mantle of academic achievement. 300 of us sat in folding chairs on the university lawn, baking under a merciless May sun. The air smelled of cut grass, cheap aerosol sunscreen, and the faint metallic tang of collective anxiety. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt hot, sticky, and profoundly tired. I looked back into the crowd, scanning the bleachers. It took me 10 minutes to find them. Richard and Brenda. They weren't leaning forward. They weren't holding up a poorly painted cardboard sign. My father was looking at his phone, his thumb swiping in a rhythmic, dismissive motion. My mother was fanning herself with the commencement program, her mouth set in that familiar, tight line of martyrdom. She was wearing beige. She always wore beige when she wanted to subtly communicate that she was enduring an event rather than participating in it. When my name was called Chloe Jenkins, Bachelor of Science in Computational Architecture, I walked across the temporary plywood stage. The wood groaned under my cheap heels. The dean handed me a leatherette folder. It was empty, a prop for the photographer whose flash blinded me for a fraction of a second. I looked out toward my parents' section. My father was still looking at his phone. Dinner was at a sterile, aggressively air-conditioned steakhouse downtown, the kind of place with dark mahogany paneling and waiters who scraped the crumbs off the tablecloth with little silver blades. I sat across from them, the empty leatherette folder resting on the empty chair beside me. "So," my father said, slicing into his prime rib, blood pooled on the stark white ceramic. "It's over. 4 years." "It's over," I echoed. My voice sounded thin, even to me. I picked up my water glass. Condensation dripped down my wrist, cold and jarring. "Have you given any more thought to your Uncle David's offer?" my mother asked. She didn't look up from her salad. She speared a cherry tomato with the precision of a surgeon. "The administrative role at the logistics firm. It has health insurance, Chloe. Dental, too. It's a very practical path. I told you, Mom. I'm not doing data entry. I have a degree in complex systems engineering. I've been building out a predictive data compression model. I stopped. I could see the glaze forming over my father's eyes, the invisible wall dropping. "A model," my father repeated, chewing slowly. He swallowed, set his knife down, and dabbed his mouth with a stiff linen napkin. "Chloe, we've humored this. We really have. We paid for the first 2 years before you insisted on taking out those loans. We supported your little coding phase." "It's not a phase, Dad. It's my career." My mother sighed. It was a terrible sound. High-pitched, fluttering, laced with pity. "Sweetheart, look at your cousins. Look at Sarah, passing the bar. Look at Ryan in wealth management. They have trajectories. You sit in your bedroom in the dark, typing. You're 22 years old, and you're still playing on the computer. It's pointless. It really is. A completely pointless pursuit." The word hung in the air, pointless. It wasn't said with anger. That was the worst part. If he had yelled, if he had slammed his fist on the table, I could have fought back. I could have mirrored his rage. But there was no rage. There was only absolute crushing indifference. He looked at my degree the same way he looked at a smudge on his windshield, a minor, irritating flaw to be wiped away. I looked down at my plate. I had ordered chicken. It was lukewarm. I took a bite, and the meat felt like sawdust in my mouth. I chewed. The grease coating the roof of my mouth, a heavy, cloying film that made me want to gag. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my water in his face like some heroine in a soap opera. I just sat there, swallowing dry meat, feeling a hollow cavern open up behind my ribs. "I'm going to the bathroom," I muttered, scraping my chair back. The legs screeched against the hardwood floor. I stood in the heavily perfumed restroom for 10 minutes, pressing my forehead against the cool glass of the mirror. I looked at myself, mascara flaking at the corners of my eyes, a red flush creeping up my neck. I hated them in that moment, but the deeper, more pathetic truth was that I hated myself for still wanting them to be proud. I wanted my mother to frame my diploma. I wanted my father to brag about me to his golf buddies. The contradiction made my stomach churn. I splashed cold water on my face, dried it with a rough paper towel, and walked back out. When the check came, my father reached for it, but I pulled a crumpled $50 bill from my purse and tossed it on the table. It was half the money I had to my name. "For my portion," I said. "Don't be dramatic, Chloe," my mother murmured, looking embarrassed as the waiter walked by. I didn't say another word. I walked out of the restaurant into the muggy evening air. The pavement smelled like exhaust and impending rain. I walked the 2 miles back to my apartment, the blisters on my heels bursting, feeling nothing but a cold, heavy stone sitting in the pit of my stomach. 6 months later, the stone was still there. I lived in a 300-square-foot studio apartment situated directly above a dry cleaner on 4th Street. From 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., my floorboards vibrated faintly with the rumble of industrial washing machines. The air always tasted slightly metallic, tainted by the sharp, chemical odor of perchloroethylene seeping through the vents. It gave me a perpetual, low-grade headache that sat right behind my eyes. My parents had effectively stopped calling. Communication was reduced to bi-weekly text messages from my mother, usually containing links to articles about the declining tech job market or passive-aggressive reminders that the spare bedroom at their house was being turned into a home gym. Dad bought a Peloton. "Hope you're eating well." I wasn't. I was eating boiled rice with soy sauce and bulk buy instant noodles. My refrigerator, a yellowing relic from the 1990s, hummed violently, shaking every time the compressor kicked on. The physical toll of the grind was undeniable. My posture had curled into a permanent question mark from hunching over a second-hand Dell monitor. There was a hard, painful knot of muscle beneath my right shoulder blade that throbbed like a phantom limb. My eyes were chronically bloodshot, the capillaries broken from staring at lines of Python and C++ until 4 a.m. I washed my hair with dish soap twice because I couldn't afford shampoo and was too exhausted to walk to the drugstore. I had sent out exactly 142 resumes. I received 112 automated rejections. The other 30 went into the void, but I hadn't stopped typing. Driven by some toxic cocktail of spite and desperation, I had thrown myself entirely into the compression model I tried to explain at the steakhouse. It was called Project Shard. The basic premise was arrogant. Rewrite the way large-scale data packets were fragmented and reassembled over cloud networks. The major players, Amazon, Google, Veridian Systems, were using architecture built 10 years ago. It was bloated. It was slow. I believed I could make it lighter. It was agonizing, deeply unglamorous work. It wasn't the cinematic montage of a hacker typing furiously while techno music played. It was staring at a black screen for 6 hours, trying to find a single missing semicolon. It was running a simulation, watching it crash, and burying my face in my hands, smelling the stale sweat on my own palms. By December, the cold started creeping through the poorly insulated windows. I wore a heavy wool coat indoors. My bank account balance read $14.82. The internet bill was due in 3 days. If they cut my connection, Project Shard was dead. I was dead. I would have to pack my bags, take the bus back to my parents' house, and watch my father silently judge me from his Peloton. On a Tuesday, the simulation finally compiled. I didn't cheer. I just blinked, rubbing the grit from my eyes. The terminal spat out the results. Data packet fragmentation time reduced by 41%. Reassembly latency cut in half. Resource load, minimal. I ran it again. Same result. I pushed the entire repository to GitHub. I made it public. I wrote a dry, highly technical README file explaining the mathematics behind the protocol. I didn't advertise it. I didn't post it on LinkedIn. I just threw it into the digital ocean, a message in a bottle from a drowning girl. Then I closed my laptop, walked to my tiny kitchenette, and turned on the faucet. The pipes shuddered before spitting out lukewarm water. I filled a chipped ceramic mug, put a cheap tea bag in it, and put it in the microwave. The machine buzzed, a depressing flat sound. I leaned against the counter, staring at the peeling linoleum floor. I was 22, freezing, malnourished, and completely alone. The spite that had fueled me for 6 months suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a terrifying, hollow exhaustion. What was I doing? My mother was right. It was pointless. I had built a ghost machine. Nobody cared. Nobody was looking. My phone vibrated on the counter. It wasn't a ringtone, just a harsh, sudden buzz that made me jump. I looked at the cracked screen. It was a San Jose area code. I didn't recognize the number. Debt collectors usually called from local spoofed numbers. I picked it up. My hands were shaking slightly from the caffeine and lack of food. I swiped the green icon. Hello? My voice cracked. I cleared my throat, embarrassed. Hello? Am I speaking with Chloe Jenkins? The voice was male, deep, and moving at a clipped, efficient pace. There was no background noise on his end, no call center hum, just dead, expensive silence. This is she. Chloe, my name is David. I'm the Executive Director of Engineering Acquisitions at Viridian Systems. Viridian Systems, a $20 billion enterprise infrastructure titan. They supplied the backbone for half the corporate cloud servers in North America. My brain stalled. The microwave beeped behind me, loudly announcing that my sad, watery tea was ready. I didn't turn around. I'm sorry, who? I managed to say. It was a stupid response. I knew exactly who he was, or at least what his company was. David Croft. Viridian Systems, he repeated, not missing a beat. I know this is a cold call. I apologize for the abruptness. Do you have 5 minutes? Yes. Yes, I have 5 minutes. I gripped the edge of the laminate counter. The sharp corner bit into my palm. I needed the physical sensation to anchor myself. This is a scam, my brain whispered. Someone hacking my phone. A prank. Excellent, David said. I could hear the faint clicking of a high-end mechanical keyboard on his end. Our Chief Technology Officer, Ian, forwarded me a link to your GitHub repository this morning. Project Shard. We've been running your protocol through our sandbox environment for the last 4 hours. My stomach dropped, not a flutter, a violent physical plummet. They took my code, they ran it. And? I whispered. I hated how small my voice sounded. I wanted to sound professional, aloof, confident. Instead, I sounded like a terrified child, asking if her drawing was good enough for the fridge. And David paused. A heavy, pregnant pause. Ian wants to know where you stole it from. The sheer audacity of the question hit me like a slap. The fear vanished, instantly incinerated by a sudden white-hot flare of indignation. Excuse me? I snapped, my spine straightening. It's a compliment, Chloe, David's voice smoothed out, losing a fraction of its corporate edge. I apologize. That was Ian's exact quote. He said, find out who she stole this from. And if she didn't steal it, find out where she lives. We have a team of 80 senior engineers who have been banging their heads against a wall for a year trying to optimize our packet fragmentation. You just bypassed their entire structural theory with a few thousand lines of Python. Did you write this entirely alone? Yes, I said fiercely. Every single line, in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner. David let out a low whistle. Well, that explains the lack of institutional boilerplate in the code structure. It's raw, it's a little messy, but the core logic is, frankly, it's terrifyingly elegant. I leaned back against the counter. My knees felt weak. The smell of the dry cleaning fluid wafting up from the floorboard suddenly seemed overwhelmingly strong. I looked at the cracked linoleum. I looked at the dirty dish towel hanging on the oven handle. What do you want, David? I asked. I didn't know where the boldness came from. Maybe it was the hunger. Maybe it was the fact that I had absolutely nothing left to lose. I want to put you on a plane, David said simply. Tomorrow morning, first class out of your local airport to SFO. We'll have a car waiting. We want you at the Viridian campus by 2 p.m. We want to acquire Project Shard, and Ian wants to talk to you about a role on the advanced architecture team. Acquire it? I repeated numbly. Yes. We're prepared to offer a highly competitive purchasing agreement alongside an employment contract. But Ian wants to look you in the eye first. See if you can actually explain the math behind the compression loop. I can explain it, I said. My voice was no longer shaking. It was dead, calm. Good. Check your email. I'm sending the flight details and a non-disclosure agreement. I recommend you read it, sign it, and pack a bag, Chloe. Your life is about to get very busy. Thank you, David. I'll see you tomorrow. Looking forward to it. The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone slowly. The screen went black, reflecting my face. Haggard, pale, dark circles under my eyes. I turned around, opened the microwave, and reached for my mug of tea. My hand was trembling so violently now that my fingers slipped. The ceramic mug hit the linoleum floor. It shattered with a sharp, explosive crack, sending hot water and brown shards flying across the kitchen. I didn't move to clean it up. I just stared at the broken pieces. The steam rose from the puddle, curling into the cold air of the apartment. I started to laugh. It wasn't a joyous laugh. It didn't belong in a movie. It was a jagged, breathless sound that scraped the back of my throat. It was the sound of a rubber band snapping after being stretched for 6 months. I stood in the middle of my freezing, toxic-smelling apartment, laughing until tears burned the corners of my eyes, staring at the ruined floor. I thought about my father's pristine white dinner plate at the steakhouse. I thought about my mother's beige sweater. Pointless. A completely pointless pursuit. I walked over to the shattered mug, my cheap socks soaking up the spilled tea. I bent down and picked up the largest, sharpest shard of ceramic. I pressed my thumb against the broken edge, just hard enough to feel the bite of it, just hard enough to know I was awake, that this was real, that the gravity in my world had just fundamentally reversed. I dropped the shard into the trash can. I had a bag to pack. First class smelled like warmed almonds and chemical leather treatment. I sank into seat 2A, acutely aware that my black slacks were pilling at the thighs and my boots had a scuff mark on the left toe that Black Sharpie hadn't entirely disguised. The flight attendant, a woman with perfectly shellacked hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, offered me a hot towel with silver tongs. I took it. The damp terry cloth was scalding, scented aggressively with synthetic lemon. I pressed it against my face, letting the heat seep into my exhausted skin. When I pulled it away, my hands were still shaking. The 3-hour flight to San Francisco was a blur of altitude sickness and adrenaline. I couldn't eat the artisanal cheese plate they placed in front of me. The brie looked like yellow plastic. Instead, I drank 3 cups of black coffee, feeling the caffeine scrape against the hollow walls of my empty stomach. My mind was a chaotic loop of imposter syndrome and defensive rage. They are going to realize I'm a fraud. They are going to laugh at me. And then, the counter thought, my code compiled. The math is flawless. Let them try to break it. When the plane touched down, the jarring impact rattled my teeth. A sleek black town car was waiting at the curb. The driver held an iPad displaying my last name. He didn't speak to me, just opened the heavy door. The interior was violently air-conditioned, smelling of ozone and expensive cologne. I watched the sprawling, sun-bleached concrete of Silicon Valley blur past the tinted windows. It didn't look like a promised land. It looked like a massive, sanitized strip mall pretending to be the future. Viridian Systems headquarters wasn't a building. It was a fortress of mirrored glass and brushed steel sprawling across 50 acres of aggressively manicured synthetic turf. As I walked through the revolving doors, the silence of the lobby hit me. It was acoustically deadened, swallowing the squeak of my cheap boots. Everything was white marble and raw timber. It felt like a monument built to worship extreme, sterilized wealth. David met me at the security turnstiles. He was shorter than I pictured, wearing a tailored navy suit with no tie. His smile was practiced, polite, and entirely unreadable. "Chloe," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, dry. "Flight okay?" "Fine," I said. My voice sounded raspy. I cleared my throat. "Where are we going?" "Executive suite. Ian is waiting." We rode a glass elevator up 12 floors. My ears popped. The campus spread out below us, tiny engineers walking on paved paths like ants in a terrarium. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of nausea. The reality of the situation was crushing the air out of my lungs. I was a 22-year-old girl who washed her hair with dish soap, and I was about to walk into a room with men who moved markets with a single email. David led me down a hallway lined with soundproof glass walls. Inside the rooms, people were staring at dual monitors, typing, drinking from branded water bottles. None of them looked up. He pushed open a heavy oak door at the end of the hall. The boardroom was massive, dominated by a table carved from a single slab of reclaimed walnut. At the far end, staring out the window with his back to us, was a man. He didn't turn around when we entered. "Ian," David said quietly. "This is Chloe Jenkins." Ian turned. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a faded vintage band t-shirt, dark jeans, and a watch that probably cost more than my parents' house. His hair was graying at the temples, cut short. His eyes were pale, assessing, and completely devoid of warmth. He didn't offer his hand. "You wrote Shard," he said. It wasn't a question. I did. Ian walked over to the table and picked up a thick stack of paper. I recognized the formatting. It was my repository code, printed out. He tossed it onto the center of the walnut table. The heavy thud echoed in the large room. "It shouldn't work," Ian said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Your load-balancing logic creates an asynchronous bottleneck at the fragmentation stage. By all conventional metrics, the packet loss should be catastrophic when scaled over 10,000 nodes. Conventional metrics rely on sequential node verification." I fired back. I didn't think about it. The words bypassed my fear and tapped directly into the 6 months of isolated, manic obsession I had poured into that code. "You're assuming the network is prioritizing integrity over speed at the gate. I didn't write it to do that." Ian raised an eyebrow. "Explain." He gestured to a massive whiteboard covering the entire right wall of the room. A tray of fresh markers sat beneath it. This was the test, not a polite interview, an execution or an ascension. I dropped my duffel bag on the carpet. I walked over to the board and picked up a black dry erase marker. I uncapped it. The sharp, toxic smell of the solvent hit my nose, and suddenly, I wasn't in a billionaire's glass cathedral anymore. I was back in my freezing apartment, smelling dry cleaning fluid, with nothing but the math to keep me company. The marker felt familiar in my hand. It was the only thing in this room that made sense. I started drawing. If you use a deterministic routing algorithm, yes, the bottleneck happens here, I said, drawing a harsh circle around a hypothetical node cluster. The squeak of the marker against the porcelain board was loud, rhythmic, but Shard doesn't do that. I decoupled the verification payload. I implemented a probabilistic data structure, a modified Bloom filter, right at the fragmentation entry point. I wrote out the algorithm. My handwriting was jagged, slanted. I didn't pause to see if they were following. I didn't care. I was angry. I was angry at my parents, angry at the cold, angry at the 112 automated rejections, and I poured all of that venom into the numbers. By the time your cloud architecture realizes the packet is fragmented, the secondary protocol has already ghosted the reassembly instructions to the endpoint, I said, tapping the board hard with the tip of the marker. Black dust fell onto the tray. "It's not dropping packets, Ian. It's hiding them from your own internal latency checks until they reach the destination." I stopped. I was breathing heavily, a fine sheen of sweat on my forehead despite the freezing air conditioning. My right shoulder blade throbbed with familiar, sharp pain. I turned around. David was staring at the board, his mouth slightly open. Ian hadn't moved. He was looking at the math, his pale eyes tracing the lines of logic I had just scrawled across his pristine wall. The silence stretched. It was thick, heavy, suffocating. I felt a sudden, terrifying urge to apologize, to shrink back into the polyester-clad girl they expected me to be. Ian finally blinked. He looked at me, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile touched the corner of his mouth. "She bypassed the latency checks," Ian muttered, almost to himself. He looked at David. She literally built a back door through our own bloated security architecture just to make the transfer faster. Is that viable? David asked, glancing between us. It's a massive security risk if we don't patch the firewall, Ian said. Then he looked back at me, his eyes burning with sudden intense energy. But it is the most elegant piece of compression engineering I have seen in 10 years. It's a localized warp drive for data packets. He walked over to the table and pulled out a chair. Sit down, Chloe. I walked back to the table, my legs feeling like wet sand. I sat in the plush leather chair. It molded to my spine perfectly. David sat across from me, opening a slim leather portfolio. He extracted a single sheet of heavy, textured paper and slid it across the walnut grain. Viridian Systems wants to acquire the exclusive intellectual property rights to Project Shard, David said smoothly, transitioning back into the polished corporate drone. In addition, we are offering you a position as lead architect of asynchronous protocols, reporting directly to Ian. You would be overseeing the integration of your model into our global servers. I looked down at the paper. There were numbers printed on it, big numbers, symmetrical, terrifying numbers separated by commas. IP acquisition, cat virgule sync dollars 000, $0 American, base salary, $325,000 USD, annually. Restricted stock units, 10,000 shares, vesting over a 4-year cliff. I stared at the ink. It blurred. I felt a sudden, violent rush of saliva to my mouth, a biological warning sign that I was about to throw up. $4.5 million. It wasn't money. It was a conceptual abstraction. It was a spaceship. It was a new universe. We are prepared to wire a signing bonus of $200,000 to your account by 5 p.m. today, pending your signature. David added quietly, sensing my paralysis. We understand you might want a lawyer to review this. We can provide a list of independent counsel. No, I whispered. Ian leaned forward, steepling his fingers. No, I don't need a lawyer. I looked up, meeting Ian's gaze. The nausea was receding, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. The stone in my stomach, the heavy, dark weight I had carried since that steakhouse dinner fractured. It cracked down the middle, dissolving into nothingness. Do you have a pen? I asked. David handed me a heavy silver fountain pen. The metal was cool to the touch. I didn't read the dense legal jargon on the back pages. I just turned to the final sheet, found the line with my name typed beneath it, and signed my name. My signature was messy, a jagged scrawl of a girl who had nothing left to prove to anyone in this room. I pushed the paper back across the table. Ian stood up. Welcome to Viridian, Chloe. David will get you sorted with HR, temporary corporate housing, and your access credentials. Take the weekend. I want you in the lab on Monday at 8 a.m. He walked out of the room without another word. David smiled, a genuine, relieved expression. Congratulations. Let's get you a hotel. The hotel they put me in was in downtown San Jose. The lobby smelled of fresh orchids and ozone. My suite was on the 30th floor, offering a panoramic view of the sprawling, glittering grid of Silicon Valley. The silence in the room was absolute. There were no washing machines rumbling beneath the floorboards. There was no smell of perchloroethylene. There was only the faint, imperceptible hum of central air conditioning and the soft ticking of a minimalist clock on the nightstand. I stripped off my cheap clothes, dropping them onto the floor where they looked like a pile of dirty rags against the pristine white carpet. I walked into the bathroom. The shower was a glass box with rainfall fixtures. I turned the water on. It was instantly scalding. I stood under it for 40 minutes, watching the water swirl down the drain, trying to wash away the phantom scent of my miserable apartment. I ordered room service, a $40 cheeseburger and a bowl of truffle fries. When the cart arrived, pushed by a man in a crisp uniform who called me ma'am, I tipped him a $100 bill from the cash advance David had given me. The man's eyes widened. He thanked me profusely and left me alone. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, wearing a thick, ridiculously heavy terry cloth robe. I ate the burger. The meat was perfectly cooked, the cheese sharp and expensive. It tasted like ash. My adrenaline had completely crashed, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion that permeated my very bones. I picked up my phone. It was 7:30 p.m. back home. Sunday evening, I knew exactly what was happening. My father would be sitting in his leather recliner, drinking a scotch, watching a golf recap. My mother would be in the kitchen, wiping down pristine granite countertops that were already clean. I opened my banking app. The balance no longer read $14.82. There was a pending wire transfer, $200,000. The acquisition funds would take 30 days to clear escrow, but the signing bonus was sitting right there. Real. Tangible. I dialed their number. It rang 3 times. The sound of the digital tone felt like a physical strike against my eardrum. Hello? My father's voice, distracted, a little annoyed. I could hear the muted commentary of a golf announcer in the background. Hi, Dad, I said. My voice was steady. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like an executive. It sounded like someone who had just commanded a boardroom. Chloe, we're a little busy right now. Is everything all right? Do you need money again? Because I told you last month. I don't need money. I cut him off. The words felt incredibly good in my mouth. Heavy, solid. I'm calling to give you an update. A pause. I heard the faint clinking of ice against crystal as he took a sip of his drink. An update. Did you finally accept your Uncle David's offer? Because it's not too late to apologize to him for taking so long. No, I'm in San Jose, in California. The television volume clicked down. The sudden silence on the line was palpable. What are you doing in California? His tone had shifted from annoyed to suspicious. I sold my compression model, I said. I looked out the window at the glittering city lights. Project Shard. The Pointless Pursuit. A company called Viridian Systems acquired the intellectual property today. There was a long silence. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. I could hear him breathing. Viridian, he finally said. He knew the name. Everyone in his tax bracket knew the name. It was a blue-chip stock he probably held in his portfolio. Chloe, are you sure? Is this a scam? Have you had a lawyer look at this? You don't know anything about corporate contracts. People prey on kids online, you know. He wasn't proud. He was immediately looking for the flaw. He was looking for the angle where I was still the naive, foolish child playing on a computer. It's not a scam, Dad. I met with their CTO today. I passed their whiteboard vetting. I signed the paperwork. I took a breath. They bought it for $4.5 million, plus stock, plus a lead architect role, a sharp intake of breath. It wasn't a gasp of joy. It was shock. Pure, unadulterated cognitive dissonance. His brain simply could not reconcile the girl he viewed as a failure with the number I had just spoken. 4, he trailed off. I heard rustling on the other end. Muffled voices. My mother had entered the room. Richard, who is it? Her voice echoed faintly. It's Chloe, my father said, his voice entirely drained of its usual booming authority. She just sold her code. To Viridian. More rustling. The phone was handed over. Chloe? My mother's voice was bright, high-pitched, laced with a sudden, cloying warmth that made my skin crawl beneath the thick hotel robe. Honey, is this true? Richard is saying something about millions? It's true, Mom, I said flatly. Oh my God. I could practically hear her covering her mouth with her hand. The theatrical gasp. Oh my God, we are so proud of you. I knew it. I always told your father, I said. Richard, she's just going through a process. You have to let genius breathe. I always knew you were doing something special in that apartment, sweetheart. The gaslighting was so immediate, so seamless, it took my breath away. She had rewritten history in less than 30 seconds. The steakhouse dinner, the comments about my cousins, the word pointless, erased, deleted, like a bad line of code, overwritten by the blinding light of a massive payout. I closed my eyes. The contradiction inside me tore at my chest. A part of me, the broken, exhausted 22-year-old child, wanted to cry, wanted to accept her fake warmth, wanted to finally have the parents I had been starving for. But the architect inside me, The girl who had survived on instant noodles and spite, who had mathematically dominated a room full of arrogant men, felt nothing but a cold, heavy disgust. They didn't see me. They didn't see the bloodshot eyes, the panic attacks, the sheer, agonizing willpower it took to build something out of nothing. They only saw the comma in the bank account. They only saw the brag they could take to the country club tomorrow. Right, I said. My voice was a dead, flat line. Well, I have an early start on Monday. I have a team to manage. I just wanted to let you know. Wait, Chloe, don't hang up. When are you coming home to celebrate? We should throw a dinner. I need to call Aunt Sarah. Oh, Ryan is going to be so jealous. I'm not coming home, Mom, I interrupted. My life is here now. I have to go. But I tapped the red icon. The call ended. I dropped the phone onto the mattress. The silence in the hotel room rushed back in, filling the void left by their voices. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The city stretched out before me, a grid of electricity and data, a vast, complex system of logic and flow. I had conquered it. I had beaten the impossible odds. I was incredibly rich. I was respected, and my future was cemented. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. The dark circles were still under my eyes. The knot in my shoulders still throbbed. Success hadn't magically cured the trauma of the grind. It had just provided a very expensive bandage. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt like a soldier who had survived a war nobody else knew they were fighting. I traced the faint scar on my thumb from the broken coffee mug. I pressed it, feeling the slight sting of the newly healed skin. It was real. I was here. I had built the machine, and the machine had saved me. I turned away from the window, walked to the heavy blackout curtains, and pulled them shut, plunging the room into absolute, peaceful darkness. Tomorrow, I had to build an empire. But tonight, for the first time in 6 months, I was going to sleep. There's a brutal truth to outgrowing the people who doubted you. The victory is often quieter than you imagined, and the people who called your dreams pointless will be the first to claim they supported you all along. If Chloe's relentless drive to protect her vision resonated with your own struggles, hit that like button, subscribe for more grounded, unflinching stories of defiance, and share this with someone who needs the strength to keep building their ghost machine. Don't let their lack of vision blur yours. Drop a comment below. What's the one dream you refuse to let them talk you out of?